This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. What you are watching unfold is quieter than that and more dangerous, because states do not usually fall when crowds gather. They fall when systems stop obeying orders. Somewhere in this country, something essential has stopped working. Not loudly, not all at once, just enough to make the math stop adding up. For years, power here looked immovable, rígid, armed, permanent. But permanence depends on circulation, on things moving when they are told to move, on arteries that never question the heart. Tonight, that assumption is under stress, not in speeches, not in slogans, in infrastructure. If you think this is about anger, you'll miss what's coming next. If you think this ends with force, you're already behind. Stay with me. Because once a system loses control of its own circulation, it doesn't get to choose how it ends. And the next piece of this story explains who is really in charge now. When people talk about power, they usually point upward. To leaders, to uniforms, to buildings with flags. But power does not live there anymore. Not in modern states. Not in systems this large. Real control now sits lower, quieter. Inside processes most people never see. It lives in schedules, in supply chains, in permissions that allow things to move or not move without anyone making a speech. This system is not governed by ideology. It is governed by flow. Fuel that arrives on time, food that clears inspection, equipment that reaches the right hands before dawn. When that flow is uninterrupted, authority feels absolute. When it hesitates, even briefly, fear changes sides. What matters here is not who gives orders. It's who makes them executable. And tonight, execution is the problem. Because something has shifted control away from the visible state and into places the state was never designed to fight. Not elections, not negotiations, logistics. And once logistics stop cooperating, everything that looks solid begins to hollow out. The question now is not whether pressure is building. It's how long this system can pretend it isn't already leaking. Because the shift didn't happen suddenly. It happened quietly. Over time, this did not begin with a rupture. That's the mistake people make. They imagine collapse as an event, a day, a moment you can circle on a calendar. But the most dangerous changes don't announce themselves. They normalize. There was a time when disruption here was unthinkable. When systems moved, because they always had, when compliance was automatic, almost invisible. Then small delays appeared. Nothing dramatic. A shipment rerouted. A schedule adjusted. A rule bent once, then again. Each change was explained, temporary, necessary, manageable, and that's how systems fail. Not through rebellion, but through accommodation. What used to be enforced became negotiated. What used to be guaranteed became conditional. The state adapted until adaptation replaced control. By the time anyone noticed, authority was no longer absolute. It was transactional, and transactions require consent. That's the quiet shift, the one you don't see on the streets, the one that doesn't trend. But once consent becomes optional, the system is no longer in charge of time or movement or outcome. It's just reacting. And reaction is always slower than collapse. Because when the first real shock arrives, there is nothing left holding the pieces together. That shock is already visible. Here is where the abstraction breaks. Not in a capital, not in front of cameras, but at a place the system cannot afford to lose control of. A place designed for movement, for throughput, for volume. Suddenly, nothing moves. Image surface, unplanned, unfiltered. They don't show speeches or slogans. They show access points, gates, machinery standing still. Uniforms hesitate. Some disappear entirely. This is not a protest spilling into infrastructure. This is infrastructure refusing to function as ordered. When workers stop coordinating with authority, the system doesn't bend. It stalls. Ships wait where ships are not supposed to wait. Timelines dissolve. Dependencies stack up. And here's the mistake analysts often make. They treat this as a local disruption. It isn't, because this location is not symbolic. It is mechanical. Remove it, and the rest of the system must compensate in real time. It can't. If you're still thinking this is about visibility or optics, pause here. You're watching leverage being applied at the exact point of maximum sensitivity. Pay attention to what stops next. Because once a critical node goes quiet, the system has seconds, not months, to respond. And it already missed the window. This is where the mechanism reveals itself. Modern states are not held together by force alone. They are held together by sequencing. One action triggers another. Clearance leads to movement. Movement leads to revenue. Revenue funds enforcement, break the sequence, and power doesn't disappear. It misfires. The system still issues commands, but commands arrive after the moment has passed. Here's the hidden truth. Authority no longer controls outcomes. It only schedules them. And scheduling depends on cooperation. When a single node refuses to play its part, the damage doesn't stay local. It travels upstream and downstream simultaneously. Imports pause. Exports stall. Cash flow tightens. And the people who absorb that pressure are not the ones who designed the system. They are the ones paid last, supplied last, protected last. Those at the top don't feel collapse first. They feel delay, but delay is fatal in systems that run on timing. The state now has to choose where to allocate what little movement remains. Security or sustenance, control or continuity. It cannot have both. And once that choice becomes visible, loyalty stops being abstract. It becomes arithmetic. What follows is not chaos, it's triage. And the next failure point exposes how thin the margin really is. Now the pace changes, because systems under stress stop failing one at a time. They fail in clusters. Production slows, then stops. Valves don't open. Numbers don't reconcile. Cash doesn't arrive. Orders don't get followed. Not because people are defiant, because coordination is gone. This is what acceleration looks like. Shorter cycles, less warning. The system tries to compensate, reassign, reroute, threaten, but every fix requires the very cooperation it no longer controls. What was once a contained disruption becomes a feedback loop. Each delay creates the next failure. Energy constrains logistics. Logistics constrains security. Security constrains legitimacy, and legitimacy cannot be enforced. You can see it in behavior, hesitation, where there used to be reflex, silence, where there used to be commands. This is the moment when institutions stop acting like institutions and start acting like individuals. Each unit calculates risk alone, and once that happens, cohesion is already broken. What comes next is not an announcement. It's a choice made thousands of times, quietly. And the system never recovers from that. This is where it reaches you. Not as theory, not as geopolitics, as daily life. When circulation breaks, you feel it before you understand it. In gaps, in absence, in things that used to be available without thinking. You notice lines where there weren't lines. Delays where there was certainty. Silence where there were guarantees. You are not watching history. You are standing inside a system that no longer knows how to serve you. And here's the unsettling part. You are not the target of this failure. You are the shock absorber. The system is designed to protect itself by transferring pain downward. That's not ideology. That's engineering. So when people say, hold on, it will stabilize, what they mean is you will adjust. You will wait longer, accept less, lower expectations. That adjustment is the final resource of a failing system. If you feel that pressure now, pay attention. Because once adaptation becomes permanent, reversal is no longer on the table. This is the moment systems rely on your patience to survive. And patience, like everything else, is finite. What happens next no longer stays contained. This is the point where containment fails, because systems like this are never isolated. They are nodes in larger structures. When one stops functioning, others compensate briefly. Then they strain, route, reroute, markets adjust, allies recalibrate. But recalibration assumes stability somewhere else. Here, there isn't. What was once a regional problem now propagates outward. Not through speeches or declarations, through missing shipments, interrupted contracts, delayed payments. The effects don't announce themselves. They register as volatility. Prices fluctuate without explanation. Timelines extend without end dates. Risk models stop converging. And that uncertainty spreads faster than any ideology. Partners begin planning around absence, around loss, around the assumption that this system may not recover. That assumption is decisive, because the moment external actors stop betting on continuity, they accelerate collapse simply by protecting themselves. No intervention is required. No hostility declared. Withdrawal is enough. And once withdrawal becomes rational, restoration becomes improbable. The system is no longer failing alone. It is being quietly abandoned. What comes next is not stabilization. It is a fork. From here, the future stops being singular. There are three paths this system can take. All of them are expensive. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment, partial recovery, limited restoration of flow, enough cooperation to keep the machinery running, but not enough to regain control. This path looks stable from a distance. Up close, it's brittle. Every shock becomes existential. The second path is erosion. Nothing breaks dramatically. Things just stop working one by one. Authority remains on paper. Institutions remain named, but real power fragments. The state survives as a shell, functioning, but hollow. And then there is rupture, a moment when accumulated delays convert into a single failure, not planned, not directed. Triggered by one decision made too late, rupture doesn't look like revolution. It looks like abandonment, orders unanswered, positions vacated, systems left running without supervision. Which path emerges depends on timing, on coordination, on whether trust can be restored faster than pressure builds. Right now, none of those variables are stable, and that means the future is accelerating toward a decision. No one fully controls. There is a temptation at moments like this to look for closure, for reassurance, for a lesson that makes the danger feel contained. There isn't one. Systems like this don't end with speeches. They end when people stop waiting for them to recover. What you are watching is not collapse completed. It is collapse revealed. The machinery is still standing. The lights are still on. But the trust that made obedience automatic is gone. And without that, power has to negotiate with time, with resources, with reality. That negotiation rarely ends well. If you take anything from this, take this. The most fragile systems are the ones that look strongest right before they fail. If you stop here, you miss what follows. Because what comes next is not about this country alone. It's about how many others are built the same way. And whether they're paying attention, stay with this story. Question what looks permanent, follow the infrastructure, not the rhetoric. Because the next phase doesn't begin with an explosion. It begins with something else going quiet. And once it does, there's no rewind-only reckoning. If you want to understand what breaks next, you'll need to see the next chapter.